and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. The subject of prehistoric and especially saurian cryptids is one that has been somewhat vacant on the Crash Course Cryptozoology channel, which is a shame in many ways because many times looking into those cases broadens one's perspectives on global cryptozoology as opposed to the currently very popular North American and or Western cryptozoology. Even though it can seem like it at times, monotony is not the way of scientific study, and we shouldn't condemn ourselves to such. So today I'd like to examine a particular story from the savanna regions of Cameroon, and specifically a cryptid that's often regarded as saurian, but in that way and in other ways is actually a mistranslation. One that's happened in a small window of time, but nonetheless gradually, and seems as though it may have a lot to do with popular culture and an attraction to saurian descriptions and cryptids. I'd like to talk about the Ngoubou. The Ngoubou was first brought to public attention in 2000 when cryptozoologist William Gibbons, who often takes trips to Africa in search of saurian stories, came back with a new story that he and his research partner at the time, David Wetzel, encountered stories of what natives of the area, the Baka natives, called the Ngoubou, which has several meanings in English translations. Before we get to that, though, it's important that we go over the descriptions given. Gibbons was able to get two photographs of two different sketches made by natives of Ngoubous, as well as hear some stories relating to Ngoubou activity, most of them pertaining to very close encounters that had happened recently but were unfortunately no longer happening due to what the natives attributed allegedly to a decline in Ngoubou population, as well as just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Essentially, what natives described visually was a large quadruped that appeared to be plated or armored, a rough skin covering, and horns at the front of its head. In fact, the natives also supposedly informed Gibbons that there were two types of Ngoubous, one that lived in the savannas and one found more frequently near bodies of water, particularly rivers. The distinctions made between the two types were mainly the amount of horns on the faces of these Ngoubou. The savanna-dwelling Ngoubou is supposed to have more horns on its head, roughly 6, forming a sort of pseudo-frill around the back of the head. Like many other cryptid stories coming out of Africa, elephant killings are often attributed to these animals. Over time, which is of course right now about 2 decades, we've seen an interesting development, a cultural one, occur around the Ngoubou. This development is the creation of the perception of the Ngoubou as a saurian, particularly a ceratopsian, something like a triceratops, with the frill of horns and the giant quadruped look and the plates of armor being attributed to that description. And of course the fact that Africa in cryptozoology is no stranger to saurian cryptid descriptions, or at least the perception of saurian cryptid descriptions. The Ngoubou is different from those other cases, and if it's not, it's the first one that is readily recognizable as different. There have been several case studies conducted involving getting descriptions of Ngoubou. You've got the William Gibbons and David Wetzel expedition in 2000, a subsequent expedition the next year by the Crypto Safari and British Columbia Scientific Cryptozoology Clubs. And then you even have research on the ground done by Michel Belot in June of 2018, another researcher interested in such accounts. While there are certain parallels to be drawn, there's actually a distinction between the cultural image of the Ngoubou as a ceratopsian and what people actually describe when talking about the Ngoubou. This is probably best exemplified by a quote from a wonderful website called the Encyclopedia of Cryptozoology, which I'll link in the description of this video, that reads about Michel Belot's expedition. It was cautiously identified by locals with an image of a triceratops, to which it was said to bear only a vague resemblance. Similar questions were posed by William Gibbons and Dave Wetzel, and even Gibbons, who is known for his very strong interest in saurian cryptid stories, remarks that there doesn't seem to be a reptilian aspect to descriptions of the Ngoubou. In fact, it seems rather mammalian, very close, more than anything else, to the rhinoceros. Looking at the recreations of the sketches that Gibbons was able to photograph, we can really see this in some good detail. There does appear to be way more of a, not just mammalian, but almost typical mammalian megafauna look to the Ngoubou sketches, and again, most closely resembling the rhinoceros. You have the rather bulky body, the longer head, and the horns located at the front, the only differences truly lying in perhaps the amount of plating and the frill, as well, of course, as the number of horns present on the faces. This, however, isn't the only way in which the Ngoubou seems to have been mistranslated. The word itself has been misunderstood in a broad sense. Ngoubou is a much more broad term than most sources tend to say that it is. According to the original writing by Gibbons as well as Belot, Ngoubou is kind of a general term for animal or large animal. It's often used to refer to real rhinoceri, even though natives will distinctly say that a true Ngoubou is not the typical rhinoceros. It's even used to refer to some other animals, as well as occasionally being applied to the Mokele Mbembe, which is a completely different, more sauropod-esque story, known in different parts of Africa. So we have this direct descriptive image of the Ngoubou, you could argue the accurate to descriptions Ngoubou. And then you have this cultural ceratopsian Ngoubou that, as natives themselves have said, truly only vaguely resembles what an Ngoubou of either kind is supposed to look like. Reasons can often be found looking at effects. It certainly has helped to make the Ngoubou a more popular story. The image of what is essentially a rhinoceros stirs up interest less than a surviving dinosaur of any kind. It also can't be denied that Africa has been painted accurately and inaccurately as a continent bearing a lot of saurian cryptid cases. There is that sort of lost world element that, again, can be accurate in many cases and is not accurate, such as in this case. It seems that the Ngoubou, being one of the more recent additions to the lineup of saurian cryptids, is accidental in the sense that it had the same conditions as many of these saurian cryptids, but it only vaguely resembled one. And yet, connections to the visuality of a surviving dinosaur in this region appear to be prevalent enough to affect the image of a cryptid in a nearby location that isn't described saurian. The Ngoubou, for all intents and purposes, is described as mammalian and essentially a variant of the rhinoceros. The image of the Ngoubou as a ceratopsian dinosaur is invalid because it is based not in the descriptions given of the Ngoubou, but rather its geographical connection to other saurian stories, and thus, linguistically and visually, has been mistranslated. I hope that even in some small way, this video helps to clarify research on the Ngoubou, if any is yet to come, and can at least give people a better idea of what it is that's being discussed when the Ngoubou is discussed. That being said, until next time.